So my presentation is around cybersecurity and phishing. Think before you click is actually one of the trademarks we use when we talk about phishing. Is anybody familiar with phishing? This is with a P, not an F. Show of hands. Okay, a couple people, right? So we'll get into that in a little bit, but those are those emails you get that are unintended. They look like they're from somebody else. They send you some information, maybe an attachment that you don't want. So I want to kick things off with a question here, and feel free to answer out loud. And it's what type of software do people want to write? It's got kind of an easy answer here. Does anybody have any ideas? It's software that generates the most revenue, right? So when I say that, you might be thinking of companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, people that are making billions of dollars writing software. But in this context, I'm talking about cyber criminals, and I'm talking about their motivation. And their motivation is to the tune of 2.1 trillion. So by 2019, the global business cost for cyber crimes, data breaches, all those kind of things will hit 2.1 trillion. And 2 years later, in 2021, it's supposed to hit 6 trillion. So that's real money. We're going to cover a couple of definitions here. So first one is malware. So when you're thinking of malware in regards to software, this is malicious software designed to damage a computer. Right? So often in the 90s or maybe early 2000s, you hear the term virus. Virus is actually just a subset of malware. Right? So malware is the top level. Virus is more often in regards to code that will replicate. So if you hear of a worm, it installs on this computer, jumps to this one, then this one, then this one. That's more in regards to a virus. And vulnerabilities. So it's important to know the difference between vulnerabilities and exploits. So vulnerabilities mean there might be something with this software, right? So some researcher, some vendor, some individual found something in this software that might be taken advantage of. And an exploit, in turn, means somebody wrote something that definitely takes advantage of that vulnerability. Start off with some security principles. So first one is people. So in my industry, we used to follow the 50-50 formula, where 50% of the successful cyber attacks were related to social engineering. So you open a link, you open an attachment, you go to the wrong website, you click that little program in your Facebook and it adds something, gets all your information. And then 50% was related to technology. So people like myself, maybe they didn't set it up right, maybe the vendor didn't release a patch, or maybe it's what we consider 0 day. So 0 day, if you ever hear that term, means everybody's in trouble, right? It means something came out today and no one planned on it, no one found it, only the bad guys found it, and it's going to be used today, right? So hopefully there's a patch right away, but that's 0 day. Now that's changed over time to where now it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of these successful attacks are people. 20% is technology. And it's really everyone's business, right? I think often in security, we point to a device on the network, or we point to the IT guy, and we say, hey, that's security, right? That's the guy that's going to take care of it. And really, because it's 80% related to social engineering, it's everybody's problem, right? We all have to take ownership in understanding where the vulnerabilities are at. We have to get trained and know how to properly interact with computer systems. And not sensitive. So this is something I hear often in business right now. I'm sure in institutions it's the same thing, is, well, our data is not that sensitive. Well, it could be in the eye of the beholder. So if you ask your employees, if you ask your vendors, if that data is sensitive, more often than not, you're probably going to get an answer that actually is sensitive to them. It just didn't seem sensitive to you. Not a target. This is another common one. So because of things like Equifax and Sony and Target and all these companies over time, most people assume, well, most of these are going after big companies, big institutions, government entities, and that's not really the case. So if you think about, a good analogy is robbing a house. So do you believe that most people rob a house because Jacob Adams lives there? Or do you think it's because of where you live, what you do? Maybe you leave a garage door open, maybe somebody sees you put a key under the door, right? They're looking for some other weakness. And that's really the same thing in my world, is that everybody has one of these, right? This has a number, and you're all on one big network. That's the internet. And these are getting scanned, every device that's connected to the network, internet, all the time. So millions of scans all the time, and they're just looking for vulnerability. They're looking for somebody that didn't install a patch, an open port, a weak password, something to get in. Least privilege. So that's really about not sharing your passwords. questioning when people ask you for information, do they really need this, right? Is there a reason they need my social security number? It's okay to have a gut check. And then security versus compliance. So you're more likely to be compliant if you lead with security, right? Because that's the top level, than if you lead with compliance on being secure. Because compliance is just a subset. I mean, there's HIPAA, there's FINRA, there's PCI, there's SOX, there's hundreds of different compliance. But if you lead with security methodology, an overall framework, from training to technology and everything that you instill in your institution, you're much more likely to be fully compliant and fully secure. Protected data. So this is really just identifying different pieces of information that you may or may not think is sensitive, but sometimes, given a state or federal data breach law outside of compliance, a simple first name and an account number, driver's license, sometimes even a first name, email address, and street address is enough to technically be protected data. Trade secrets. And these can cause a series of different outages, right? So you have cloud services, on-premise services. Now, when we're talking about cloud services, maybe many of you use Google Apps, G Suite, and a lot of people might think, well, that's Google's problem, right? They're taking care of security. But if you guys have weak passwords, right? If you don't control what applications can be installed, what devices can be joined, how the Chromebooks get updated, that's really your problem, right? Google's not going to mandate that you have to follow it, but they are going to give you the tools to do it right. Encrypted or unrecoverable data. So we'll get into some ransomware here in a little bit, but this is more about your data being encrypted and you don't have a way of getting it back, or maybe you can try to recover it from a backup. They can be company-wide outages, individual, client-facing, and of course, vendor-facing as well. And really the best target, since we know that 80% of these, happen by social engineering, it's any device you use. So it is your smartphone. It could be a phone call. It could be a text message. It can be an email. Emails are, in my world, are probably the most prolific when it comes to these types of attacks. In person, so it could be whether you're talking to somebody or you're sliding underneath your keyboard or your password right on a Post-it note. No one's ever done that in this room, right? Social media. Now, in this decade, right, convenience has won against security. I hope that's not always true. But if you go on Facebook or any social media site and you see what people post, you realize that that's true, right? It's, they don't care about, what they post, where they're at, that they're traveling. Hey, nobody's going to be there this weekend, right? Have at it on my house. So that's true, right? Now, you have to keep that in mind. So people are pretty careless when it comes to this. Website or URL. So this could be, drive-by downloads. So it's something embedded into a website. And even legitimate websites. Just recently, a tool that we use in our world called CCleaner, right, actually got compromised. And there was a distribution of that, or a version of that software that was compromised, that was actually reporting information back. So it was siphoning off data. Attachment or file. So those are very common. PDFs, Word docs, or what appears to be a PDF or a Word doc. PUP. So this is potentially unwanted programs. This could be when you install a program and it has all those check boxes, and if you don't uncheck them, right, it's going to install 10 programs instead of the one you wanted. And then ransomware. So this is really where I've seen the most common attacks, done in the last 5 years. So it's really about holding you and your data ransom. So you'll get a PDF attachment, and even some of my own clients, right, have been victims of this, because this is a people thing. If you have the right permissions on your computer and you can open that attachment on your email, you're going to get ransomware, guaranteed. The software's not going to stop it. Your antivirus isn't going to stop it. Your malware's not going to stop it. You're going to get it. So you open what appears to be a PDF. Maybe it just flickers on your screen. And you're like, oh, well, I'll just go about my business, go on to the next thing, right? Must have just been a weird file. And what happened in the background is that file was embedded with a malicious program, and it encrypted all of the files that you have access to. All of them. And it uses AES 256-bit encryption, which in the public and private sector, that's unbreakable, right? So there's no one that's actually broken that encryption. So you're guaranteed to not break that encryption. I've got a buddy that works at NASA on the GPS systems, super intelligent guy, and more of an ethical hacker. Wouldn't have a chance at it, not even a chance. So if you have really good backup right now, okay, you can restore your data. But remember, they're constantly trying to get better, right? These cyber criminals are motivated by a lot of money. So the newer iterations of this malicious software is they're going after the backup files. So if you have backup files locally, let's say on a server or an attached drive, they're trying to encrypt those as well. Right? Now you don't have good backups. And you also have the next version, which has been spotted in Europe, where if you do not pay them, they will post your data publicly. Who's going to pay? I think everybody. And even if you do pay, you still may have to report it. So it's really important to keep in mind, like I said, how common this is, and it affects everybody. This is non-targeted. These are emails that go out by the thousands, by the millions. And this, if you don't pay, the first day, it usually exponentially gets higher. So typically they'll ask for Bitcoin. Hey, I want 500 Bitcoin if you want your files unencrypted or decrypted today. Tomorrow it's 1,000. A week from now it's 30 grand. Right? So the Los Angeles Community College, right? They paid $28,000 in January because they waited long enough. They thought, well, we have good backups, we can get it back, and they didn't. So make sure you test your backups. Make sure you're aware of these things. So these are some facts around phishing. So back to that capital P, not capital F for phishing. And Apple is actually the #1 phish brand, right? Makes sense. iTunes password reset. How many people might click on that? A lot. So let's think about, did you just request that, right? Is this something that you know for sure you can validate? China. So 85% of all these phishing emails come from China. That's probably not a surprise. There's actually a fun fact here. So the Inc. 500, right, some of the fastest growing companies in the country, there's a book called Cyber Heist, and what they did is they found the employee email addresses of all these Inc. 500 employees, and they sent all these phishing emails. And of all those employees, right, these fast growing companies, a lot of tech companies, 33% of all of them clicked on it. So 1 out of 3. There's 200,000 new types of phishing campaigns every month. And here's some different phishing types. So they're obviously deceptive, ridden with malware, data theft. So they might be used just to pull certain personal identifiable or PHI, right, the health information off. DNS phishing. So you may see what appears to be a website you trust in the email, or maybe a website you do trust and you go there that actually has been hacked. Web Trojan, we talked about that a little bit. And then here are some kind of examples. Now these are pretty easy to spot, but I still wanted to show them to you guys. So this is, since Apple's the #1 spoofed brand, what do you see about this email, right? What should you question right away about this, right? And the first thing is who it's from, right? Apple.cl. Right, CL is not a valid domain type that Apple owns. I should question that. I should question, just the format of that. Obviously, initially, I should question, did I just ask for a password reset? Is my wife or someone else also on this account? Did they just ask for this password reset? If not, right, there should be immediate red flags. And remember, you can always hover over these links here, especially if you use Outlook, and it will show you the actual link. So you can see that even though it says get started, right, that doesn't go to where I think it does. That doesn't go to anything that Apple owns. Here's another one just on current events. So obviously, that's another hot topic is, the irony is the Equifax data breach also creates a bunch of phishing campaigns that's news about the Equifax to cause more data breaches. Right? So it's this vicious cycle, because then you get news about it that seems interesting. You're like, oh, I want to know more about that. And in fact, you just got breached. So hot topics and current events are quite popular in phishing. And you can see another one, like here I've got 2 periods too. This is, that's not going to be a valid domain. Gov.us, this should be questionable right away. And once again, even though it lists whitehouse.gov, don't think I put there. That's actually the same link. So that's that pages.no-before, right? So it's still not a valid website. And here's some top safety actions. So these are things, maybe someone else manages for you, obviously, but there's still things you need to be aware of, that you need to make sure that these are happening, that somebody should validate, much like SOX controls, right? I've been a SOX auditor for years for Fortune 500 company, is validated. Prove to me this is happening, right? Don't assume it's happening. So installing software updates. So that means from your smartphone to Windows to Mac. I know it's painful sometimes. Apple just released iOS 11 yesterday. Everybody's probably just, painfully going to upgrade at some point. But usually there's a lot of security features built in. So if you want to talk about the number one preventable measure, get things updated. Make sure there's antivirus and anti-malware scans. Make sure you have, firewalls installed, right? That there's devices on the edge of the network that are updated. You're paying for support on them, and those are hoping to prevent, some of those attacks. Non-admin account. So whenever possible, people aren't using accounts with administrative privileges. Because if I click on something and I have the broader my privileges on the network or that device, right, the more apt I am to install this malicious software everywhere. Avoid phishing emails, strong and safe passwords, back up your files, and obviously validate that. A backup is only as good as it has been tested. So remember that. If you remember one thing today, is a backup is only as good as it has been tested. If it hasn't been tested, I can guarantee you it might not work, right? There's a high chance. An audit, right? So an audit mixed with, training, right? So a security audit, this type of, security awareness training for other people in your organizations, teachers, whoever it may be. So here's some techniques really for strong passwords. So we're talking about strong passwords, we're talking about complexity, history, expiration, lockout. This is really the don't tell, don't know. If you're familiar with the legal concept of non-repudiation, right? So you don't want to know anyone else's password because you're really assuming some of that risk by knowing their password. Nobody wants to talk about if they do something, if that person does something illegal, you're tied to that. So you do not want to know anyone else's password, ever, in the organization, never. And here's some examples on coming up with good passwords. So, if you use phrases, you're much more likely to remember these types of passwords and how to change them over time. So right there's a Socrates quote, and I just took the first letter of each word, and I threw in some upper lowercase, some symbols and numbers, and I have a complex password, what appears to be very, very random. And those are important, especially if you want to use a password manager. If you do use one like a LastPass or something like that, make sure you do what we call two-factor, right? So you get a token, and you also have a password and user. So when you log in, you also have a code that goes to your phone. Then some traveling and browsing kind of tips for you guys. So public Wi-Fi, remember that's clear text. So if you're connecting to any kind of wireless and you don't have to put in a password, red flags should go up all over. If you want to go to Yahoo News, that's fine. But if you log into your bank, that's a really, really bad idea. Right? Because there's probably somebody on that network or on that airport, that hotel, that just hangs out in that lobby just looking for you. And not by name. They're just looking for people to connect to that network, and they're looking at all the data that passes over that network. So encrypted. So if you do travel with laptop that has personal identifiable information or something, financials, whatever you don't want released, get it encrypted. Right? Apple has a built-in system called File Vault. Microsoft Windows 8 and 10 Pro have BitLocker. Windows 7 Ultimate has BitLocker, so you can encrypt the whole drive. So if you have a strong password on that machine, just like in the medical field, if I lose that laptop and I can prove the chain of custody that was encrypted, I do not have to report that breach, right? Because that's encrypted in a way that no one's proven that they can even break it. But if it's not, you're absolutely going to report it. SSL lock. So if you go to a website, right, always look for that lock in the address bar. If you don't see that lock, or if you see a red X or something that looks different about it, it may be expired, it may be just implemented improperly, right? So they're not really protecting that site the way they should. VPN, so if you do travel or remotely access the network, the main network, remember in a VPN, you want to make sure it's what they call not split. So if all the traffic goes over that VPN, you could safely connect to your bank, connect to other things that you're putting in your login, your password. If it's split, meaning that the regular internet traffic is going over this connection, this public Wi-Fi, and only stuff bound for the headquarters or the main network, in this case the school, goes over the VPN. That means the other part's not safe. Lock it. So anytime you're away from your computer, there should be policies for this, but also get in the habit of window key L or on a Mac, make sure it's in sleep mode so that it's locked. I need to re-authenticate when I come back. And trunk it. This one's huge, right? So if you travel with your laptop, never ever leave it visible in your car. Right? Not long ago, I had a client that had somebody traveling. Luckily, they didn't have any information on that laptop. They got it stolen because they went inside, right, put it in the front seat. You've got to trunk it. So here's some action steps, takeaways. Hopefully I didn't talk too quickly on some of these things for you guys. To really be aware, right? So you really have to take in, context that we're all part of this solution, and we're all about mitigating risk, right? Because for the most part, right, any large company definitely admits that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when they get attacked. So they're probably already setting aside funds to deal with these kind of problems. Equifax, the example that everybody's going to think of, 143 million individuals, in that data list, and that was an easy fix. So what that was, right? It's very simple. Is that most of the internet runs on Linux servers, and they run on what they call a web stack. And one of those pieces that's key is called an Apache web server. So when you go to a website, it's probably on the other end an Apache web server giving you that data to view that website. And they didn't update a patch that was available 2 months ago. That's all it was. So it's that simple. So just updating Apache web services to the latest version wouldn't happen. Now, consequently from this fallout, right, when they set up a portal in Argentina for people to get some of this identity protection, they actually left that website as admin. So they created another complete vulnerability in their system. Read. So read everything. Like I said, you have to question and read who this email's from. Is the grammar poor? Does this person send these types of emails to me? Right? This seems like a weird information request. You've got to read it fully. Be careful who you trust. So if you're a trusting person, I can tell you you're definitely more apt to fall for some of these things. So you really, if you're too quick to go through things or too trusting, you really have to consciously become competent of these types of things. That these risks are always out there. That it's not about who you are. It could be where you are. And remember, you're just a number. You're just a number until they get in and then they find out, oh, this happens to be Jacob Adams' computer. I didn't hack it because it's Jacob Adams. Think, right? So you have to be thinking about this always. And then report. So whether that's to your internal IT department or a vendor you have, but make sure you're reporting these things, because obviously this same type of education and facilitation helps bring about change and better security. So if you're reporting these things, people can maybe identify that signature or how somebody was trying to successfully attack you or hack you. And this is kind of showing you guys an example if you're ever curious on that little lock on a website. If you ever want to test how well a website actually implemented that, you can go to SSLLabs.com. Right? And you can put in a website, and there's a little checkbox underneath there that says, do not display this website, because if you're testing your own website, you might not want to display that on the list, right, as some of the worst ones. But this was back when QuickBooks Online first released. I happened to run across that, and they got a C, right? So they did a very poor implementation of SSL. So if you're familiar with Poodle or some of those other terms that have come about over the last couple of years, right, they were super vulnerable. So the KnowBe4 badge on there, so that's the company we partner with. So we do a lot of these structured phishing campaigns, and it's an ongoing thing. It's what I consider just-in-time learning. So it's constantly sending these emails out to end users to test them, right? And then when they click on that, it shows them a web page and says, hey, here's why you shouldn't have clicked on this. So that's something we're heavily involved in, and I believe that we can shrink that 80% over time, hopefully, where maybe we flip it and 20% of the problem's people. So who has the first question?
I have two. First question is, what kind of growth are you seeing for Bitcoin and concerns associated with that? And then the second question is, the new iPhone that's out with the face recognition to open the phone, what kind of
Those are two really good questions. So first on Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, from its inception had a lot of great tech visionaries and leaders from Google and other companies write about this cryptocurrency, right? So I won't get into the specifics because I'll get a lot of glossy eyes on this, but it's good on paper, right? You see a lot of theories and things that are good on paper, and then the implementation, right? The practicality of it isn't so good. And Bitcoin really has become kind of the cyber criminal currency, right? Unfortunately, that's what it's evolved to because it's very difficult to trace. And you got to remember that these are not centralized groups of people, right? This isn't like terrorism where maybe you have this huge group of like 300 people that follow this guy and they follow this methodology, and you have some individuals that still follow that and they follow through. But that's not what cybercriminal organizations are like. It's really an individual thing. I mean, you could spend a couple weeks shadowing someone, learn how to be what we consider like a script kiddie, right? Just using tools, and you could get pretty good at it, right? You could make real money and do this. So the barrier of entry is not very high, and it's not like there's a huge overarching organization. I mean, there's the anonymous and those kind of things you hear of. That's a small portion of it. These are individuals. So Bitcoin has been very much tied into ransomware and these types of crimes. Now, on the iPhone 7, so I definitely have my concerns about the facial recognition, definitely from a legality standpoint, right? So you're protected by the Fifth Amendment, right, on putting your PIN in, right? So if a law enforcement officer asks you to enter your PIN, you do not have to enter your PIN, ever. Fifth Amendment, guaranteed. So keep that in mind. Now you have a biometric one, right, with your fingerprint. So if you reboot your phone, especially like on an iPhone, right, it asks you for the PIN the first time you log in. So there's a lot of people. I'll use an example of one of the founders of KnowBe4. If anybody remembers the name Kevin Mitnick, used to be the most famous hacker in the world, turned into a good guy. One of the things he always recommends is if you're traveling, right, to power off and power on your phone when you land. If anything ever came up where somebody at the airport or whatever wants to inspect your phone, you do not have to put your PIN in. Different when it comes to your facial recognition, right? Hey, unlock your phone. So that's a big concern by itself, right? I mean, there's the false positive element, but like I said, there's definitely the legality side. Is that how easy is it, to circumvent? Or it's supposed to be a 3D mapping technology. Can I 3D print, or can I print out something that gives the illusion that tricks the 3D mapping, and I can still unlock that phone? Any other questions?
So what other steps can we take? Because I have my life on my phone. So, I mean, I have the fingerprint and I have the passcode. Is there anything else that we can do to protect our phones outside of those two items?
Now, I can say, so, and I'm not, I'm an agnostic when it comes to the different technology platforms, right? I use Apple, Google, all of them. Now, Apple has shown itself because of the way they control their app store and some of the other restrictions, on how the device works, that they have been more secure as far as the number of infected apps. And also, over the last couple years, there was a research that was able to take an Android device that was completely wiped, right? Wiped, just like you give it to the Verizon guy, and he's able to get the token off of that, reinitiate the handshake with the G Suite server, and download all of the data, right? So that has been possible. Now, as far as besides picking platforms and all that kind of stuff, I mean, make sure you're always keeping them up to date. Like I said, that painful thing of, it's going to change stuff, or I like to stay 3 versions back, that's gone, right? Because if you're that guy with your identity stolen, with somebody getting into your company email, you having to report a data breach, it's really bad. So that inconvenience, and that's why I said you have to override that convenience. It shouldn't be more important, especially when it comes to your livelihood and the people around you that it affects, because it affects everybody. So there's obviously some different antivirus apps and things like that, but as a whole, strong passcodes, like I say, will be yet to be determined on the facial recognition, but that's really the best course of action right now.
You mentioned not using the public Wi-Fi type things. So if you use your phone as a mobile hotspot, that's pretty secure, right? If you have a good password.
Definitely better way to go about it. Yes, that's right. That's an out-of-band. It's a cellular-based network. Now that's still a network in and of itself, but the method you're using to connect, right, is not a man in the middle. So when we're thinking about public Wi-Fi, we're thinking, big red alert of man in the middle, meaning somebody else is on that public Wi-Fi, just running an easy program that's free. You could download, between Wireshark and Scapy, I could create data packets that look like something else, and I could easily gain access. So definitely better if you're traveling. If you don't have VPN, use a hotspot. Or like I said, if you're on public Wi-Fi, it's fine to go with your news articles. Don't load any website that you have to log into. Any other questions?
Thanks, Jacob. We're going to have